Schuyler Bailar,
The first transgender male.
The first openly transgender athlete.
the first ever transgender person to play on an NCAA men's team.
Testosterone is one of the only arguments about why trans women shouldn't compete in women's sports. Could you maybe present the key arguments why you disagree with them?
There is available research that supports that testosterone suppression does produce meaningful competition between cis and trans women. Michael Phelps produces half the levels of lactic acid. He's got twice the lung capacity of the average person. But when people talk about that, what do they say? Wow. If those differences exist in the women's category, it is immediately considered unfair.
If I were to decide tomorrow that I was a 47-year-old woman, should I be allowed to go shower in a women's locker room?
There's been no actual effect on sexual assault statistics across the states when this was kind of implemented.
It is playing on real fears that I think are valid. We do need to protect women and girls.
How optimistic are you, Schuyler, and what do you think the next steps are now?
You mentioned as well, not to keep saying you mentioned in the book, but just because there's so much interesting stuff to unpack, how a lot of people close to you, even with often good intentions, could react quite badly. For example, if you were to say they were transphobic or to call them out on a specific behavior, over apologizing, whatever it be. What's your advice then to people who may have a trans friend, a trans family member, or are just trying to be allies to the people around them in integrating that feedback better and just in general, being better allies?
Yeah. Thank you for that question. I think, a lot of people have a really good intention to try to support, but then when they are told that they failed in some way, react really poorly. And I think it's a lot because nobody likes to be told that they've failed, and people take it personally. I'm generalizing. Maybe not everybody does this, but I feel like most people, when told you did this wrong, are like, no, I didn't. Or, I'm so sorry. And it becomes this whole thing and they make it about themselves. And I'm guilty of this too. I'm not trying to put myself above this at all. It's been a big learning process for me in my relationship, for example, with my wife, or interpersonal relationships with other friends. And then also doing the work that I do in teaching allyship, to have the understanding, again, in myself and in others, that we don't always get it right. And actually, we should expect sometimes that we're going to get it wrong. And when we do, how we respond is usually more important than whether or not we got it right in the first place. And that takes an amount of internal resilience. It takes saying, hey, I'm going to mess up. And when I do, I'm not a horrible person. I didn't do this terrible, terrible thing. This isn't a descriptor of my character. It's just, I need to address this moment now. Right. And Ollie, you probably read this in the book, but I've made mistakes, and I've been called racist, and I've made racist errors. And that was really hard for me to initially digest, especially this one I did very publicly, which I mentioned in the book. And if you're curious, you can read that chapter. But I stumbled a lot in when I was called racist, and I said, no, I'm not. And I tried to defend myself, and I tried to explain myself, and I dug myself a very deep hole. And what was really important for me was being able to recognize, you know what? I did do this thing that hurt some people, and it doesn't matter what I think about it. And yes, I actually also ended up agreeing with them ultimately and learning so that I could agree. But even it didn't matter if I agreed. What I failed at most was when somebody said this hurt, I said, no, it didn't. And that's not okay. And I think when I think about allyship, the truest intention in allyship is, can you show up when somebody says, ouch, and say, oops, and fix it? As opposed to saying, I didn't mean that, because our intentions don't always land. And that, again, is a human happening, and we have to address it in the moment, as opposed to trying to explain it away.
Yeah, I think it's a really important point. And I think I really agree with what you say about kind of learning from that, because I feel, just from my own experience, in the last 3 years, especially, I've really learned a lot about queer experiences, especially. And I think that it is really about learning and wanting to learn. And that's not to say that maybe I haven't, for example, made mistakes in these ways, but it's about, and that's not about taking away responsibility or making those mistakes okay, but it's kind of about learning from them and really actively trying. And I think for some people, it's been so kind of conditioned in them from a really young age from their parents, for example, that this is the way it is, that it's almost for younger people, at least, to some extent, not their fault. I was wondering what you think about that. For example, people who have had very conservative parents, for example, who have been taught a certain thing at a young age, how do you kind of approach them to show them the right way when they might be so fixed in their views? That's kind of how I mean it.
Yeah. I like that question. A lot of what I do as an educator, and I want to be specific because there's, again, ways I approach things when I'm in educator mode versus what I would do in like my personal life. When I'm in an education mode, a lot of what I do with people who seem stuck or sort of maybe very rigidly attached to what they believed growing up is ask questions. Where did that come from? Where did you learn that? Why do you think you learned that? Are you sure that that's the truth? If so, how? And I'm asking these questions when I have these conversations with as much genuine curiosity as possible. Like I really try to sit there and think, how do we get here? And it's not a, oh my God, how do we get here? Like it's not a judgmental question. It's truly like, what did you learn that brought you to this place? And maybe there's something for me to learn, right? And sometimes I do learn in these moments a lot about, like, for example, religious beliefs that I didn't understand or didn't know more about. And it's been actually really helpful to hear people explain how they came to their conclusions. Sometimes as that happens, there are little pieces where I'm like, oh, that's really interesting. I know X, Y, and Z about that. Can I share it with you too? And that then can expand a little bit more. It's like, I imagine sometimes that people have walked this very specific path and I'm like, oh, there's all these other doors you missed on that path. Like, can we talk about them? But what I'm doing is saying, hey, did you consider this other thing? I'm not saying you're wrong. And there's a really important distinction between trying to have a conversation with somebody and telling them that they're wrong versus trying to have a conversation with the intent to show them things they might not have previously considered. And so that's the difference. I'm not trying to say, you're really stuck in conservative beliefs and therefore you're wrong. I'm trying to say, what are these beliefs and how did you get there? And are there any things that maybe you missed along the way? So that's my approach. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But I do find that the sort of like, I don't know, maybe Socratic method, if you will, of asking questions is often more productive and yields more connectedness and therefore more allyship than you're wrong and I'm right kind of approach.
And just a quick question, since you mentioned religion. And it might be a bit of a touchy subject, but how do you respond if someone says, oh yeah, I'm a Christian and God made two genders? How do you respond there?
That one's always a interesting one to have a conversation about. And I will start by saying that none of my intentions and hopefully none of my actions in those moments with folks that will then harness religion as a way to dismiss my existence or more. None of my intentions is to disregard what they say. And I mean that let me be more specific. I've had conversations with people that are like you said, but God said there's two genders. I'm not going to sit there and try to tell them what God did or didn't say because I don't know. I can't. I'm not going to, not going to tell them that. I'm not, a theologist or theologian by any means. I have been raised in Christianity. And so there's some things I know about the Bible. And so I might share certain pieces that I know. I really sometimes it depends on the moment and the person and what kind of like conversation they're open to. The simplest is saying a lot of times when people will say they're like, oh, you need Jesus, you need God, whatever. And they'll say a bunch of things about how I'm messed up because I'm defying what God gave me. And I'll actually ask them a lot about what Jesus was like. And Jesus was somebody who, there's a lot of evidence about this too, and it's in the Bible. So I'm focusing on the religious texts. Jesus was somebody who stood up for a lot of the marginalized people of his time. In fact, pretty much all of them, all of the outcasts, the social outcasts, the religious outcasts, the people who didn't follow the rules. He was somebody who stood up for those people. And so when we talk about being Jesus-like, a lot of it is having compassion for people we don't understand that are social outcasts. And I absolutely think that Jesus would have stood with the people who are marginalized today, and trans people are a part of that group. So at the very least, can you create space for that, right? That's part of the conversation. A more theologically driven conversation is actually talking about the Bible. You mentioned that you're an English major. I don't know if they call it majors in the UK. Okay.
I read English.
You read English? Okay. And one of the things that I took in college was the history of English language class. And it was, not comprehensive because it was one semester. But one of the primary ways that we studied the history of English was through reviewing different versions of the Bible. And the reason I like to say that is not to dismiss the word of God or the value of that, but to highlight human error, because there has been a lot of different translations of the Bible because it was written 2,000 years ago. And throughout that time, yes, I'm again not refuting the word of God, but the word of people is sometimes not exactly the word of God. And as we study, the reason we use the word, the Bible to study English is because it has changed, that the translations have changed over periods of time versus based on what rulers were the primary people changing the rules. So fascinating history of the Bible. I'm not explaining it in like the most in-depth ways, but there's a book called Unclobber that talks a lot about this. But I think if somebody's open to thinking critically about the Bible, again, not the word of God, but about the writing of the Bible. And I think it's important to distinguish the two. Sometimes that can help open a little bit more about actually being committed to one's faith and not to the ways that some people have abused faith.
Hey guys, I hope you're enjoying the episode. I just wanted to drop you in a word from our sponsor, Manscaped. You can use the discount code LOAF to get your discount, because even a lion needs to tame its mane.
Get the Performance Package 5.0 Ultra from Manscaped now. Stay fresh with no cuts, so that your baguette leaves no crumbs.
Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed that short clip with Schuyler Bailar. If you want to check out the full episode, click right here. Since you got to the end, I'm assuming you liked the video, so please leave a like. It really helps the channel. And subscribe, because we've got loads more like that coming very soon.